Remember those times we've talked about how civil rights abuses like the denial of due process against men in family and sexual violence cases could affect the rest of the justice system? How we pointed out that replacing presumption of innocence with presumption of guilt could lead to other civil rights abuses, and why this fundamental right should never, ever be compromised. Without the presumption of innocence, you have no due process. Criminal accusations become convictions in any case without significant exculpatory evidence. As such, they can be used to get anyone out of the accuser's way by simply creating a situation that results in the imprisonment of the accused, regardless of his innocence. Even if, upon being accused of a crime, you are able to provide exculpatory evidence that proves your innocence, the presumption of guilt could impact your case. If you do not have the presumption of innocence, every action you take in relation to the investigation can be treated as a potential crime. Everything you do or say can be presumed deliberately deceptive or deliberately uncooperative. You can be presumed guilty of any number of process crimes during the investigation and trial of your case. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. Process crimes refer to offenses against the judicial process. These crimes include failure to appear, false statements, obstruction of justice, contempt of court, and perjury. All things that could prevent the conclusion of the case from being drawn on fair assessment of accurate information. Did you contradict your accuser's story? Can you prove every detail of yours? You can be accused of lying about any detail you have provided. Were you asked for information or physical evidence you didn't possess? You can be accused of hiding it or deliberately withholding it. Imagine if you were so accused, knowing you could be presumed guilty unless you could prove your innocence. Laws forbidding these behaviors, when deliberate and with intent to obstruct the judicial process, exist to prevent the process from being falsely manipulated by either side of the case. They are crimes regardless of whether they're committed in an effort to secure a conviction or to avoid one, but they do not receive equal treatment under the law. Just ask anyone who has faced an intimate partner or sexual violence accuser in court. The accuser can lie about all kinds of things, but the accused has to be very careful that nothing he says can even be interpreted as a lie if he wants to stay out of jail. The importance of how these crimes are handled is obvious. Under the presumption of innocence standard, an individual should only be convicted of any of them if it is proved that the act was deliberate, willful, and relevant. In a fair and just system, in order to prove a person charged with a process crime committed it, the state would be required to prove not just that the defendant's actions fit the circumstances described in the statute, but that he intentionally tried to interfere with the investigators' or court's access to accurate information related to the case, and that it could have affected the outcome. If this is provable, the state's response should be the same regardless of the legal, social, or political position of the individual suspected of interfering with the process. This standard might mean some people would get away with attempts at interfering in the judicial process because the state cannot prove the attempt was deliberate and willful. But it would also protect citizens from overzealous use of allegations of process crimes to punish the innocent for winning their cases, or witnesses for not helping government bureaucrats win theirs. That is an absolutely vital check on the state's power over citizens, a power which is all too readily abused by officials with touchy egos or political agendas. Does that type of abuse of power sound far-fetched? Not if you're Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, according to the publicly available evidence from his case. It's exactly what was done to him. Ask K.T. McFarland, former Deputy National Security Advisor who received similar treatment from the Department of Justice herself. In her article, Michael Flynn didn't commit a crime, he was set up by deep state to cripple Trump presidency, she stated the following. It has taken nearly 4 years, but the truth is finally emerging about the FBI's investigation of retired Army Lieutenant General Flynn. The truth is that the deep state and some senior Obama administration officials set up Flynn in hopes of using him and others to cripple the Trump presidency from the start. The move against Flynn was also a preemptive strike to remove the National Security Advisor before he could carry out President Trump's plan to reform and streamline the sprawling intelligence community and its 16 different agencies. She went on to describe how the accusation that Flynn had conducted an illegal communication with the Russian ambassador, presumably in violation of the Logan Act, is preposterous. The communication in question was part of the job of the incoming National Security Advisor. The Logan Act, she pointed out, has never been used to criminalize communications during a presidential transition, and in fact, no one has ever been convicted of violating it. According to McFarland, FBI investigators used a conglomeration of carefully presented half-truths and false information to, quote, craft unsubstantiated narratives of Flynn's alleged wrongdoing. Based on her own experiences with FBI agents, she described the process much as I have described it above. In August 2017, FBI agents showed up at my house unannounced. I thought they wanted to ask me questions for an FBI background check of some friend or former colleague. Instead, they wanted to ask about the Trump election campaign and Russia. I wasn't very involved in the Trump campaign and certainly didn't know anything about supposed Russian collusion, so I mistakenly went ahead and answered questions without a lawyer. The FBI agents repeatedly reassured me that I was just a fact witness. Unbeknownst to me, the FBI had obtained all my government files, emails, text messages, and phone logs, which I had turned over to the government as required by law when I left the White House. I didn't keep copies of these records. The FBI agents asked me a series of gotcha questions, quizzing me on my recollection of telephone calls and meetings during the presidential transition, including the precise words that Flynn used when speaking with me about his calls with the Russian ambassador many months before. She went on to describe how she was repeatedly interviewed by the FBI without a lawyer because they'd said she wasn't the target, only to be subpoenaed by Special Counsel Mueller. This finally prompted her to get a lawyer, who learned she was being presumed untruthful. That presumption was used to get her to agree to a day-long interview to clear things up, during which the Mueller team pressed her for information they could use to implicate Flynn and Trump. She recalls, "The suggestion was that if I cooperated with the Mueller team and told them what they wanted to hear, my problems would go away. I told the truth, but I didn't have information to implicate Flynn or President Trump. Eventually, the Mueller team moved on from me, but it was the worst experience of my life. There were times when I thought I might be dragged before a jury in Washington with the full power of the U.S. government against me. I thought I would have to prove myself innocent, not the other way around." Prosecutors and the FBI have unlimited resources to pursue any case they want, while a person being investigated has to pay for his or her own legal costs. My own legal bills were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Flynn's were almost certainly in the millions. When all else fails, government investigators know they can bankrupt someone just by the process alone. In other words, the investigators didn't interview McFarland to ask her about information they didn't have. They weren't trying to fill in any gaps in their investigation. They were trying to find something, anything she couldn't fully or correctly recall, to use as fodder for a manufactured process crime they could use to blackmail her into turning on her bosses. They were not seeking a just outcome to their investigation. They were seeking conviction by any means, regardless of the evidence. What does that mean for us? It means that we, the men's rights movement, were right about false allegations and the indispensable nature of due process. Since 2016, we have witnessed evidence unfolding that shows something I personally find flat-out terrifying. I don't care if you're on the left or right when it comes to the Trump-Russia controversy. Consider the seriousness of what we have learned here. We've spent the last few years learning that our nation's federal bureaucracy engaged in massive civil rights violations as part of a conspiracy against an elected official and his administration in order to protect itself from efforts at reform. When the state's power is unchecked by due process, particularly the presumption of innocence, criminal allegations can be used with impunity by federal bureaucrats to stage a coup if they don't like who the public elects to be their bosses. This has to be the biggest red pill I've ever seen. We've dropped into a timeline straight out of a John Grisham novel. The question is, how will it end? What can we do with this information? What is the solution to a permanent and parasitic bureaucracy so arrogant that its administrators are comfortable openly attacking its host? I'll be discussing some ideas with my co-host this week on HBR Talk. The discussion streams on multiple platforms. You can tune in Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern via the link in the low bar, or find other viewing and listening options for that time or later on badgerfeed.com.